Some corners of the world feel haunted, not by ghosts exactly, but by absence. Places where the air itself whispers of things lost, never to return. Tonight, we journey into 3 of the most unsettling places where things are lost and never returned. The Bermuda Triangle in the boundless Atlantic, the Nevada Triangle, high in mountain deserts and secret bases, and the Alaska Triangle, frozen wilderness that swallows people whole. Each is different: ocean, desert, and tundra, but each holds stories of vanishings and things that simply blink out of existence. Sup creeps, and welcome back. I'm Noelle, your host and resident weirdo Wisconsinite of Creepy Confidential, a podcast delving into the mysterious realms of cryptids, cults, conspiracies, and other worldly creepy. The Bermuda Triangle, sometimes called the Devil's Triangle, is by far the most infamous of these 3. On a map, its 3 points are roughly Miami, Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. The first hint of mystery in this region comes not from folklore, but from newspapers. On September 17, 1950, an unease slipped quietly into the pages of the Associated Press, carried by the pen of Edward Van Winkle Jones, who chronicled something far stranger than routine maritime loss. He wrote of a stretch of ocean where ships seemed to vanish as if swallowed whole by the sea. His report did not scream for attention, yet beneath its calm, journalistic tone lurked a creeping dread, as though he had stumbled onto a truth far too large, too unnatural to fully grasp. Jones spoke of vessels that departed under clear skies, their hulls steady, and their crews experienced, only to dissolve into nothingness, without distress calls, without wreckage, without even a whisper of explanation. It was as if the ocean, in that particular region between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, had developed an appetite. The compass needles spun without reason, he noted. Instruments faltered, and seasoned captains found themselves disoriented in waters they had sailed countless times before. There were no storms to blame, no reefs cruel enough to account for such total erasure. Ships simply disappeared. And not just ships, aircraft too, their final transmissions often calm, eerie, so before fading into static, as though something unseen had reached up from the depths and plucked them from the sky. What made Jones's account so unsettling was not just the losses themselves, but the pattern. An invisible boundary where logic seemed to falter and the rules of the natural world grew thin. He didn't name it the Bermuda Triangle. That would come years later, but the seed was planted, in his words, a suggestion that this was no ordinary patch of ocean. He described it almost reluctantly, as if aware that giving too much attention to such a place might invite something back. The sea has always held its mysteries, but here, Jones implied, the mystery was active and deliberate. The disappearances were not violent in the traditional sense. There were no signs of struggle, no debris fields, no final moments of chaos, but instead, there was only absence, a chilling, unnatural absence that left families waiting, investigators baffled, and the world quietly unsettled. Reading his report now feels like uncovering a warning buried in time, a first glimpse into a phenomenon that would later capture imaginations and fears alike. But in that moment in 1950, it was just a story. One that drifted across the wire services like a ghost ship itself, and it largely unnoticed by the masses. And yet there is something haunting about that simplicity, about the idea that the mystery announced itself not with spectacle, but with quiet, measured words. As though the ocean didn't need to shout, as though it knew that eventually we would come looking. And by then, it might already be too late. 2 years after that quiet ripple of a story in 1950, the unease returned. The message was strong and impossible to ignore. When in 1952, Fate magazine published an article by George X. Sand, chillingly titled, "Sea Mystery at Our Back Door." Unlike the subdued reporting that came before, Sand's words felt like a door creaking open to something far more deliberate, far more ominous this time. He didn't just recount disappearances, he mapped them. He traced invisible lines across the Atlantic, connecting vanishings like constellations of dread, forming a crude triangle that seemed to hum with an unspoken energy at that time. This was no longer a scattering of unfortunate incidents. This was a pattern, a real boundary, a place where reality itself appeared to falter. Sand described ships found abandoned with meals still warm on tables, lifeboats untouched, and no sign of struggle, as if entire crews had been plucked from existence in the span of a single breath. Aircraft, too, drifted into this region and were never heard from again. Their final transmissions often laced with confusion, their instruments behaving erratically as though something unseen was bending the very laws that guided them. There was something deeply unsettling in the way Sand framed it, not as a distant, sort of exotic danger, but as something uncomfortably close. At our own back door. It suggested that whatever force lingered in those waters was not contained. It was not dormant, but present, waiting just beyond the edge of ordinary awareness. He spoke of compasses spinning wildly, of clear waters betraying seasoned pilots, of a strange haze that would sometimes descend without warning, disorienting those who passed through it. And always at the center of all of that triangular shape, stretching from Florida to Bermuda to Puerto Rico, a geometric omen etched into the ocean, as if the sea itself now had drawn a boundary, a line between the world known and something far older that maybe we were not aware of and far less forgiving. What made Sands' article linger in the mind was not just the facts he presented, but the implications he left hanging in the silence between his words. He didn't claim to have answers, or perhaps because there were none to give, but he hinted at possibilities that felt far more unsettling than simple storms or some sort of navigational error. There was a sense that this region was not merely dangerous, but that aware, that it responded in ways we could not predict or understand, as if it was its own entity. The triangle became more than a route. It became a threshold. And once that idea took hold, it was impossible to shake. Because if there truly was a place where ships could vanish without a trace, where the sky itself could swallow planes whole, then what did that say about the world we thought we knew and the realms we thought we knew? Sand's article, again, didn't just report a mystery. Again, it gave a shape, it gave a form, a presence that people could point to now on the map. This is when from just reading, from what I understood, this is now where people were actually referring to it from here on out as the Bermuda Triangle. The legend really exploded in the 1960s and 1970s, fueled by sensational books and speculation. But the first, I'll say, documented case, the first well-known case was Flight 19. Now, if you've watched any of these modern shows that, like Josh Gates has done a show about the Bermuda Triangle, they talk about Flight 19. And on December 5th, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy TBM Avenger bombers lifted off from Fort Lauderdale on what should have been nothing more than a routine training exercise. Flight 19, a simple navigation drill over familiar waters. These were not inexperienced men. These were trained pilots guided by a seasoned flight leader who had flown countless missions before. But somewhere over the Atlantic, something began to unravel. It started subtly, almost innocently. Compasses that refuse to behave. I just imagined, they're tapping their little devices, their compasses, trying to maybe figure out what's happening. Needles, spinning as if caught in a silent frenzy. The flight leader's voice, once steady and authoritative, began to fracture over the radio with confusion. He spoke of losing his bearings and of not recognizing the land below him, of a growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Quote, "We don't know where we are." It's a simple quote, but that's honestly what he said. He reported to say, his words cutting through the static like a warning no one could answer. And when they talked about the static, that's also something you see in a lot of these, shows or movies where they're going through. All of a sudden, their words can't get through the radio. Now, the ocean stretched endlessly beneath them, featureless almost and indifferent, as if it had just erased every point of reference that these guys relied on. As the minutes dragged on, the situation grew more desperate. The pilots circled, trying to find their way back, but the sky seemed to shift against them, the horizon no longer trustworthy. Even the sun, nature's oldest guide, offered zero comfort, its position now a source of doubt rather than direction. Ground control listened helplessly as the voices from Flight 19 became increasingly strained, the confusion deepening into something far more unsettling than simple navigational error. It was as though they had drifted into a place where the rules no longer applied, where distance and direction bent into something unrecognizable. Then, without ceremony, without a final, definitive moment of catastrophe, there was only silence. The radios went dead. 5 planes, 14 men, simply gone. No distress signal, no wreckage, no oil slick markings in the water, just gone. In response, a rescue aircraft, a PBM Mariner, was launched into the same darkening expanse, carrying 13 more men tasked with finding the lost squadron. It, too, never returned. Somewhere in that same stretch of ocean, it, too, vanished, swallowed by the exact same unseen force, as though whatever had claimed Flight 19 was not finished, and it claimed them as well. The disappearance of the rescue plane only deepened the dread and now turned a tragedy into something even more chilling, something that felt less like coincidence and more like a pattern repeating itself. To this very day, no trace of Flight 19 or the rescue crew has been found. No debris, no remains, nothing to anchor the event to the physical world in any way. The official Navy report would later summarize the incident with a phrase so stark it borders on the surreal. Quote, as if they had flown into Mars, end quote. And perhaps that is what makes the story linger. Long after the radios fell silent, the idea that these men didn't simply crash or sink, but instead cross some sort of invisible threshold, perhaps, slipping beyond the reach now of explanation. Over the years, dozens of vessels and aircraft have vanished here, sometimes with no distress signals, no debris, no nothing, just like those flights. Theories continue to swirl, rogue waves, quote unquote, electronic fog, even wormholes. But now let's turn our gaze inland to the jagged, secret, shrouded wilderness of the Nevada Triangle. The Nevada Triangle is loosely drawn between Las Vegas, Nevada, kind of southeast, Reno, Nevada, in the north, and Fresno, California, to the west. The triad encompasses rugged Sierra Nevada mountains, a remote high desert, and even the vicinity of Area 51, and of course, a place steeped in mystery and conspiracy, as we know all too well here at Creepy Confidential. According to some reports, around 2,000 planes have been lost in this region over the decades. But not all authorities buy the myth. Retired FAA safety officer Jim Champ pushed back, saying many crashes are explainable. Wind, pilot error, treacherous terrain. Meteorologists like climatologist Kelly Redman point to dangerous downdrafts in the mountain air. Small aircraft can get caught in these sudden, powerful downward air currents. One of the earliest and most tragic of this area is from the night of December 5th, 1943. A B-24 Liberator bomber disappeared during a night training mission out of Fresno. Something kind of stirred in the vast emptiness, the darkness stretching between the Sierra Nevada mountains and the desert beyond, a region that would one day be whispered about as the Nevada Triangle. A B-24 Liberator bomber lifted off from Fresno Army Airfield, its engines roaring with mechanical certainty, cutting through the cold air as it carried its crew into what should have been a routine training mission. All of these seem to be routine training missions not all of them, but the big ones, the majority of them. So at the controls were Second Lieutenant Willis Turvey and co-pilot Second Lieutenant Robert Hester, young men trained to trust their instruments, to read the sky, to command the machine beneath their hands. There was no storm that night, no violent winds to twist them off their course, just darkness. And yet, somewhere along the route, something went very wrong once again. Or perhaps something found them. We don't know. Radio contact was steady at first. The kind of calm, procedural communication that marks an uneventful flight or uneventful training exercise. Then, as the Liberator pressed deeper into the mountainous expanse, that calm began to fracture. Reports grew uncertain. Navigation, once precise, became questionable. The Sierra Nevada range has always been unforgiving, though. Its jagged peaks rising like, blackened teeth underneath and against the sky. But seasoned pilots knew how to navigate its dangers. But this was different. Something about that night disoriented them, as if the very landscape had again shifted beneath them. And then, without warning, the signal vanished. No distress call, no desperate final transmission, just silence, as though the aircraft had been erased mid-flight. Search crews scoured the region in the days that followed, combing through snow-covered peaks, deep valleys, and endless stretches of wilderness that seemed to resist being fully known, almost. But the mountains offered nothing in return. No wreckage glinting in the sun, no trail of debris, no sign that the Liberator had ever passed through there at all. It was as if the aircraft and the men inside it had slipped into a place that existed just beyond the reach and vision of us, of Earth, a hidden pocket of the world where things could vanish without leaving so much as a scar. And the fact that it was so near Area 51, that of course makes me scratch my head quite a bit. But the unofficial explanations leaned on the familiar, right? Navigational error, mechanical failure, the unforgiving terrain. But those answers, they just seemed hollow against the total absence left behind. Planes crash, they break apart, they leave evidence. This left nothing. Over time, this disappearance became one of the earliest threads in a much larger tapestry of unseen, a pattern that would come to define the Nevada Triangle, a region where experienced pilots would lose their way, where aircraft would vanish, and where the boundary between sky and earth seemed to blur into something far more treacherous. And perhaps that this was what lingers most about the night from 1943, again, the quiet, creeping realization that whatever claimed that Liberator plane did so without a single struggle, without noise, without explanation. Just a routine mission until it wasn't. Just a flight path until it led somewhere else entirely. And somewhere in that endless stretch of mountains and desert, beneath the layers of time and silence and earth, the question remains, what did they encounter in the dark? On September 3rd, 2007, famed adventurer and aviator Steve Fossett took off in a small single-engine plane over the Nevada Triangle and never came back. A lengthy search turned up only his identification cards a year later, followed by some wreckage far off course. So at least that one somewhat had an explanation. Officially, investigators attributed his disappearance to wind turbulence and pilot error. But the legend of the triangle whispers, again, of something more sinister, something darker, like what's going on? So why all the fear? The terrain here is punishing, like we mentioned, deep canyons, sheer cliffs, and unpredictable skies. Some say, like I mentioned before, the proximity of Area 51 adds that sinister layer, right? That secretive layer. Secret military craft, UFOs, and other conspiracies continue to swirl in the shadows of that place. But as we move on, finally, we drift north to a place where the earth is silent again, vast, and unforgiving, the Alaska Triangle. Now, this one, I'll be honest, I did not know about. So when I just started sort of researching and continuing to write, I wanted to add this one in as well. So we kind of have our own triangle of triangles. So where is it, you ask? The Alaska Triangle is roughly drawn between Anchorage, Juneau, and formerly known as Barrow. Now, encompassing frozen forest, jagged peaks, wind, tundra, again, kind of silent killers, if you will, and more than 200 square miles of remote wilderness. That truly is, kind of the last frontier, the last wilderness. So how did the mystery of the Alaska Triangle begin? At least that's what I asked myself. The triangle gained public attention in October of 1972 when House Majority Leader Hale, Boggs, and Representative Nick Begich just disappeared while flying in a small Cessna from Anchorage to Juneau. A gargantuan 39-day search effort followed this disappearance. 40 military aircraft, 50 civilian planes, and more than 3,600 hours in the air, covering some 325,000 square miles. Now, I kind of thought secondary to this is like, if this was just a quote unquote normal person, would they have really gone to this measure to try and find them? I mean, is it because of who they were? But man, that's a lot. And you're pulling out military aircraft. So in October of 1972, beneath this vast brooding skies of Alaska, a disappearance unfolded that would stain the wilderness, the beautiful wilderness, with a deeper kind of unease again. One that still lingers like a shadow stretched too long across the land. Hale Boggs, a powerful voice in American politics at the time, boarded a small Cessna alongside his friend Nick, a rising figure whose future seemed as expansive as the state he represented honestly at the time. They departed from Anchorage, bound for Juneau, and their flight path cutting across a region now whispered about as the Alaskan Triangle, a place where wilderness is not just vast, but watchful. And it seemed as though it remembered the sky, like the area remembered every soul that had vanished beneath it. And the aircraft was modest, a quiet commuter plane, nothing built for spectacle, just a routine journey over terrain that, while unforgiving again, was far from unfamiliar to seasoned pilots. The story reigns again and again about how these are not noob pilots or adventurers, and yet somewhere between departure and destination, something mysterious happened. At first, there was nothing to suggest the flight would become anything more than another entry in a logbook. The weather, though typical for Alaska, was navigatable. The communication systems were functioning normally, but then, like so many stories that emerge, from these triangle regions, contact simply stopped. And again, no distress signal, no panic transmission, just a sudden suffocating silence that replaced the steady rhythm of expected updates when they're traveling. It was as if the plane had flown into a pocket of some sort of void where sound could not escape, just like the others. Search efforts began almost immediately, and what followed was one of the largest search and rescue operations in U.S. history at the time. Planes sweeping the skies, crews combing through forests and glaciers, eyes scanning every inch that they could of the landscape that seemed determined but to keep its secrets. But the land offered nothing. No wreckage tangled in the trees, no debris scattered across the ice fields, not even the faintest suggestion of impact, just absence. And that absence began to feel unnatural, just like the others. Planes don't vanish, right, without leaving some sort of trace. And even in Alaska's kind of harsh, remote terrain, this seemed like something that they should have been able to navigate with no problem. And there's no evidence. Again, even when planes go down in these crazy high mountainous areas with snow, you still can find pieces and parts of a plane. So again, this is another weird, different situation. The Alaskan Triangle is and has become a region that already steeped in quiet disappearances just because of the region. And now it seemed to swallow these aircraft whole, claiming another offering. Even if you wanted to go into something as serious as, I won't say serious, but maybe serious and sentimental, as they're claiming, nature is just claiming something. We don't know where it's going, but it's just wild that, again, this one completely disappeared. Entire plane and its passengers gone, as if it never existed. Now, in the years since, the mystery has only deepened, becoming less a question of what happened and more of just a reminder that there are still places in the world where we don't get answers. You can't reach any answers. There's places in the world where things just disappear because somewhere between Anchorage and Juneau, in that stretch of wilderness that seems to just kind of breathe on its own when nobody's there, a plane carrying powerful men at the time and unspoken futures simply, poof, ceased to be, disappeared. And that's, again, what's just so unsettling about these triangles, these little areas. They get overlooked, they seem really pretty, and yet these crazy things happen. Now, some other chilling incidents, just to mention, include in January of 1950, a Douglas C-54 Skymaster transporting 44 people vanished near Yukon, Alaska. No debris, no sign of them ever being there. In the 1970s, Gary Frank Southerden disappeared on a hunting trip. Investigators later recovered a skull near Porcupine River, and in 2022, DNA confirmed that it was his. But its condition suggested bear trauma, not supernatural forces. So that's also something on the other side, is these crazy areas, especially like there's lots of things up there. Bear, moose, wolves. If you're on the ground and not in the air, but the things in the air make no sense. Like, what happened there? So the more stories continue to swirl. Hikers vanishing off of ships. They're taking ships from one point to another. Marathon runners disappearing. Pilots reporting instrument abnormalities again, or anomalies of some kind, and then radio silence. Now, local indigenous folklore speaks of Kushtaka, a shape-shifting otter people who lure lost travelers deep into the wilderness. So this was something, when I was researching, I was curious if I was going to come across in that particular area, some sort of native people to that area. They always have creatures and things that they believe in strongly. Others whisper of magnetic anomalies, and in some parts of Alaska, compasses can deviate by up to 30 degrees, throwing navigation into chaos. Now, if you are a hiker, or even especially if you're flying by plane, 30 degrees is the difference between life and death in an area like that. Now, vortex theories have also taken hold. What if this land isn't just some remote area, right? What if it's a portal, a place where some sort of realities hang out, or that they just literally swallow up people, places, things? And then, of course, I had to mention this, there are UFO sightings, Bigfoot rumors, and spectral shapeshifters and dancing among the northern lights. So up the north, in the northern area, they finally latch onto the idea of extraterrestrial, supernatural, where the other areas, it seems like it's just mysterious. So what do we have, right? 3 triangles, picking up kind of the different areas. We have ocean, mountain, tundra. Each different, each triangle is deadly. The Bermuda Triangle devours ships and planes in deep rolling water. The Nevada Triangle snatches planes among rocks, wind, and perhaps other secrets. The Alaska Triangle swallows people, aircraft, and stories beneath the silent snow. Are they linked by something more than a myth? Maybe. Or maybe they're simply places where human error meets extreme nature, and then legends grow on that. But still, the vanishings persist. So why do we feel these places are cursed? Is it because of the unknown? Because we can't see beneath the waves, past the mountain ridges, or inside the drifting fog or snow when nobody's around? Or is it because some part of us longs to believe that the world is bigger and darker, more mysterious than we allow ourselves sometimes to admit? Tonight, we've traveled through 3 cursed triangles. Ultimately, that's the journey. From watery grave of the Atlantic to the wind-torn deserts of Nevada and to the frozen, unknowable heart of Alaska. So thanks for joining me for today's episode, The Cursed Triangles, the mysterious realms of the Bermuda, Nevada, and Alaska Triangles. Please take a moment to leave a review wherever you're listening to Creepy Confidential, and please give us a follow. We don't want you guys to miss out on any episodes. And of course, for more creepy content, visit creepyconfidential.com. So stay creepy, my friends, and I'll see you next time right here on Creepy Confidential.